The Holy Gospel according to John, the 14th chapter. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many dwelling places. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to myself, so that where I am, you may be also. And you know the way to the place where I am going. Thomas said to him, Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way? Jesus said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you know me, you will know my Father also. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. Philip said to him, Lord, show us the Father, and we will be satisfied. Jesus said to him, Have I been with you all this time, Philip, and still you do not know me? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words that I say to you I do not speak on my own, but the Father who dwells in me does his works. Believe me that I am in the Father and the Father is in me. But if you do not, then believe because of the works themselves. Very truly, I tell you, the one who believes in me will also do the works that I do, and in fact will do greater works than these, because I am going to the Father. I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If in my name you ask me for anything, I will do it. The Gospel of the Lord. Beloved of God, grace to you and peace from the one who created us, redeemed us, and moves among us still. Amen. So, texts like this one from the Gospel of John can be a little bit tricky for a preacher, mostly because ones like this are so familiar. Church people have heard it 1,000 times, and a whole lot of people who aren't so familiar with church have also heard it a whole bunch. For example, regular church attendee or not, I guess that most of us have heard this text read at least one funeral service. Traditional funeral sermons on this text encourage us to imagine Jesus putting his carpentry skills to good use for us in heaven, making up a bright and shiny room for us and for our loved ones to call home when our time on earth is done. Others of us have heard this text used to influence interfaith conversations, usually by suggesting that people of other religious traditions have no place in God's reign, and most certainly will not be our neighbors in any of those aforementioned bright and shiny heavenly rooms. The common theme here is that most of us have learned to hear these words from John and cast our thoughts away from the complexity of this earthly life, and instead look heavenward to the glories awaiting us in our Father's house after we die. I gotta say, I understand the tendency. Jesus' words are reassuring. Do not let your hearts be troubled. In my Father's house there are many rooms, and I'm going to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I'll come back and bring you with me, so that where I am, you will be also. Part of my own weary soul breathes a tiny sigh of relief when I hear these words, because Lord knows, literally, that words of assurance are hard to come by in these days. Lord knows, literally, that it's exhausting to battle our way through the minuscule and massive challenges surrounding us every day right now. If you saw my weekly video message to the congregation on Wednesday, you heard me and my husband Jason talking about what a rough week it's been around our house. Patience has been in shorter supply. Sadness and maybe even some atypical low-grade depression are kind of more at the surface. We've been feeling frustrated about pretty much all of the things, and also a little afraid of the long-haul nature of this COVID crisis and of the reality that life just isn't really going to ever be quite the same again. I know because you've told me that things are feeling heavy for you too. Loneliness is taking a new kind of toll for many of us, even for the proudest, self-proclaimed introverts among us. Some of us are regular visitors to hospitals and clinics for reasons that have nothing to do with COVID, except that they suddenly have everything to do with COVID because showing up to a hospital feels risky right now, even when it's necessary. Some of us are separated from loved ones who are ill, or who are nearing the end of life, or who have died recently. And the grief of all of that is almost too much to bear. Some of us have lost jobs, or have taken significant pay cuts, or have been furloughed, and the financial stress on top of everything else is like almost enough to topple us. Some of us live with depression or anxiety that might be relatively well controlled in normal times. These are not normal times, and things feel rough. Some of us are feeling bewildering signs that our overall wellness is just a little bit out of whack in ways that we haven't really experienced before. And these are only the COVID-related parts of our life together. We don't even have space to think about the climate crisis, or the immigration and refugee crisis, or the food insecurity crisis, or. It's no wonder, friends, that we long for words of assurance. It's no wonder that we'd rather look toward the golden heavenly home than face the brokenness that's both within us and all around us. Like Philip in this gospel reading, we too are apt to ask Jesus, all right, where is God? Show us the mother, the father, the heavenly parent, and we will be satisfied. Where is God? A close friend of mine named Jen kept a blog through a particular phase of her life. She began one memorable post in this way: I have spent the last week seeing God everywhere, but principally in the disappearing spaces between people. As I was praying over this text in preparation for this sermon, the memory of this friend's words became gospel for me. It maybe sounds almost cruel to talk about the disappearing spaces between people as gospel when we're in the middle of this extreme kind of physical distancing, but just stick with me here for 1 second. I've spent the last week seeing God everywhere, but principally in the disappearing spaces between people. Church, I do think that the scriptures promise us an ultimate future dwelling at God's side. And I confess my hope that God's dwelling will be filled to overflowing with all kinds of surprising people, including people of different faiths. But the promise of an otherworldly, heavenly home isn't what stands out to me as I read John today. Instead, I hear a recounting of the disappearing spaces between people. I hear a story of relationship, a deep and intimate relationship between Jesus and his friends that is lived out not in the sweet by and by, but in the grit and pain of an earthly existence, which is hard just as often as it is not. And boy, were Jesus and his disciples in the thick of that grit and pain. This particular piece of John's gospel unfolds on Thursday evening, the night before Jesus' crucifixion. Jesus knows that he will soon leave this world, and he's trying to prepare his disciples for all that is about to take place. Just a few verses before the reading we heard today, Jesus told the disciples that one of them would soon betray him. And then Jesus told Peter that he will deny Jesus 3 times. It's in this context that Jesus says, as we just heard, do not let your hearts be troubled. Seriously, Jesus? How could one's heart be anything but troubled by all of this? Philip and Thomas and the others are afraid, and frankly, Jesus' words about him going to prepare a place for them, and then coming back to take them with him, and reassuring them that they already know the way to the place where he's going, sound like actually a little bit crazy. So Thomas just says it. Jesus, we have no idea what you're talking about. We don't know where you're going. We have no idea how to get there. Jesus says, of course you know the way, because I am the way and the truth and the life. If you have seen the Father, you have seen me, and you have seen him, and you know him. Philip enters the conversation with his own doubts. All right, Lord, show us the Father then, and we'll be satisfied. The disciples tend to get a bad rap in the Gospels. They're slow to understand and often slow to believe. But I read Thomas and Philip's questions and doubts not so much through a lens of thick-headedness. Instead, I see them as an illustration of the disappearing spaces between them and Jesus. These disciples have walked a long road with Jesus, and Jesus is telling them that there's still a long and difficult road ahead of them. Their questions to me are an indication of the trust that they have in their relationship with Jesus. That trust might not seem evident on the surface of their doubts, but somehow their relationship with Jesus has deepened to a point where they are unafraid to be vulnerable with him, even in the midst of their fear and anxiety. A pastoral colleague of mine suggested last week that fear and anxiety, in tension with trust, is where we find the beginnings of hope. And I think that's right on. I've spent this past week seeing God everywhere, but principally in the disappearing spaces between people. This is a story about relationship. It's about the relationship between Jesus and his friends, but it's also about the relationship between Jesus and the Father, the Mother, the Heavenly Parent. Philip asks Jesus to show them the Father, and Jesus says, "Friends, you already know the Father because you know me. We dwell together, one within the other. There is no space at all between us. Believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, but if you can't, believe because of the works themselves." And oh, what works they have been. The way of Jesus, which these disciples have walked along with him, has been marked by acts of love that reveal the very face of God. Healing the sick, raising the dead, turning water into wine at a big old party, shedding holy tears alongside his friends who were nearly destroyed with grief, creating huge feasts for thousands of people out of just a little bit of fish and a little bit of bread. Earthy, tangible works that change lives here and now, in this present moment, in this very time. Beloved of God, these are anxious times. And here's what I wonder. Dare we put that anxiety in tension with trust in the same Jesus who calls us just like he called those first disciples, who calls us again and again to allow the spaces between us and him to disappear, who calls us over and over into a deep and intimate relationship with himself. Dare we find hope in the midst of this anxiety? We have seen God because we know Jesus. And we know Jesus through the radical ways in which he lived and loved and healed and served. We know Jesus for the ways that he still shows up in the grit and pain of this earthly existence. Through his life, death, and resurrection, he completely dissolved the spaces between us and him so that we might be freed to show a dead and dying world what resurrection looks like, feels like, smells like, and tastes like right here, right now, even in the midst of a pandemic. You know the place, you know the way to the place where Jesus is going because you've already seen it. So as we gather again today around the abundant feast of bread and wine, rooted in relationship with the one who raises us from the graves of our own fears and anxieties, may we dare to live out the hope that we find there. You know the way to the place Jesus is going because you've already seen it. So go in whatever ways are safe and appropriate right now. Bring the hope that you have come to know in Christ to the places that he has first gone. Send notes of support to the sick and the suffering and to those who care for them, right down to the hospital custodians. Join the Beds Plus meal train and provide for the hungry and the poor. Learn about Ahmaud Arbery's story and advocate on behalf of those who are victims of race-based violence in this country. Drop a care package on the porch of the neighbors you barely know, or make a gift to ELCA World Hunger in support of our neighbors across the oceans. Serve, beloved of God, in whatever safe and appropriate ways that you can right now. And then notice as the spaces between God's people begin to disappear in spite of this physical distancing. Amen.